How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, with the brand new is going to be the start of a brand new series on this channel, and I do hope that you enjoy it. It's going to be the weekly ruling session, and this is something that I think is going to be a lot of fun. There's a lot of very interesting rulings. Always please go to your head judge and ask if you're unsure about a ruling, just in case. Rulings do tend to change from event to event, and it's just because of different head judges and the ways that things get ruled moving forward. So keep that in mind when you're going through a lot of these. I thought these were really interesting. Some of these I've already known for a long time. Some of these really surprised me and they're newer. So that's something where if you want to keep track of all the new rulings, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's hit 30,000 so we know that we love this video and I keep doing more of these. And that's one thing where I want to keep doing more series and new series. So I think this will be a really fun one. I'm really excited for this. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over in Imperium Duels, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, RW, Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so, all down below in the description. Also use my TCGPlayer affiliate link, and then you can actually just directly support the channel and it's no cost to you. So I do hope that you have a wonderful time in the video. I'm very excited to make this. Let's hop right into the first ruling. So the first thing I want to talk about today is going to be something that comes up fairly common right now, and that's going to be DShifter versus Artifact Lancia. Now, which one takes precedence? So if Shifter's already active, even if your opponent goes like Shifter and you chain Lancia, Lancia will always take precedence here, and that's really important to know. Now, Lancia is only during your opponent's turn, but Shifter is for 2 turns, for whatever reason. So if you are really worried about the fact that your opponent has you under Lancia, at least Shifter is 2 turns, so you get locked out for 1 turn, your opponent gets locked out for the other turn, especially if they're playing like Fiendsmith cards, and you're actually able to play the game a little bit. And that's why if I play Malice, I'm going to be playing Shifter in the main deck, because I think that is just the best counteraction to the Lancia, because at that point, you're like, listen, I can play under Shifter, no problem. You cannot. Whether it's just like making a Baguska or making like a detonator, it just becomes fairly awkward, right? So that's one thing that I really like about it, but I do just want to let you know that the Lancia does take precedence here, and that's really important to know. The next thing is going to be, where do they go? What happens to materials, equip spells, and what have you underneath the different dimension ground? So this card is labeled as, this turn, any monster sent to the graveyard is banished instead. Now, like Centurion, it's a Centurion monster, not a monster card. And so this will be very similar to how materials are a material. They are not classified as a monster card. So the materials are just a material. Same thing with a Requiem equipped to an engraver. It is just an equipped spell. So when you go with a DDG, if you have your Exceed removed from the board or your materials removed from the Exceed, they will go to the graveyard because they are labeled materials and not a monster. That's really important to know. The other thing is that the Requiem will also be labeled an equip spell if you go to send it off your engraver to send something that your opponent controls. So that's another thing where your Requiem will dodge the banish and just go directly to the graveyard. This is something that is a little bit newer, but it's also been around for a while, and it's something that I really want you to know because DDG is a fantastic side card, and if it stops you from losing a game, to know this ruling is very important. And it's even better, too, when you're playing something like Tier, you're under DDG, and you have, like, I don't even know, like a Garura and a Mali underneath your monster, and all of a sudden it gets sent the next turn, or even that turn, and you're like, alright, cool, my monsters stay. That's a really important ruling to know. So for the next one here, this is definitely a newer one. This is for Malice. Shout out to Spencer for the info on this, and this is something where you definitely want to double check this with like a head judge, but this should be how it's ruled, because if an access code is negated, it only checks the attribute on the resolution of the effect. It's an also, so it's the entire effect. If you have an access code that is negated, you can always still banish cards for cost. And that's one thing where usually you have to banish different attributes. But since the also implies that it happens at resolution, and if the card is negated, it doesn't check for the attribute and resolution at that point, you can keep banishing your different Malice Link monsters from your graveyard, which is kind of crazy. Banish Whitebinder, banish the Cryptor, banish your Red Ransom. You can keep banishing because it doesn't check for the attribute since it is negated. Therefore, you can banish as many dark monsters, light monsters, whatever you want to banish that are link monsters from your graveyard as well, which is really good knowledge if you are planning on playing Malice moving forward. Can't draw? Now, this is one thing where you want to make sure that you understand how this works and why this works. So if you resolve Prosperity, you can't draw for the rest of the turn. Your opponent can still eclipse you though, because it's what we call a delayed effect. You do end up drawing in the end phase, but you simply just wouldn't draw. It's not a guaranteed draw either, because your monsters could be dealt with, so it's perfectly fine to use Book of Eclipse. What's not perfectly fine is using a Dark Bribe on your opponent, because that's guaranteeing them a draw that they cannot have. So delayed effects like Eclipse, you can use under Prosperity. That's perfectly fine, because the draw is not guaranteed. Now, this one's out of left field, and it's really only going to affect you if you play Kashtira. I like this one a lot. I think this is pretty cool. If you control a Kashtira Birth and no cash monster on the board, your opponent uses Fiendsmith's Tract, you can chain Scareclaw Cash, summoning the Scareclaw Cash. Resolution, your opponent's going to go like Lurie effect, right? Your Birth will trigger because you now control a Kashtira and it checks on Resolution. That's kind of crazy, and that's something that I didn't know. I was always under the impression that you had to have a cash monster on board, but you don't. And, that's one thing where you, again, want to check with your head judge, but definitely a very interesting scenario, a very interesting ruling, and one that caught me off guard. So this is a very interesting one, and I want to know if you actually know this ruling. So can this activate? If you activate Card of Demise and your opponent chains Ash, are you allowed to chain Gamma? And definitely take a moment, pause the video here, think about it, and then come back to see what your answer is. And just to be blunt about this too, you absolutely cannot Gamma that, right? It's because the card is immediately applying until it's not. So if you're activating Card of Demise, you were immediately under the no special summon clause. And that means that you have not special summoned at all, right? That's what makes it a legal activation. So if you activate Card of Demise, you can't attempt to make the card illegal at that point, because you're already intending to use the effect of it to make sure that you have not summoned and you will not special summon. So that's really important to note, that the second that you try to activate a Gamma, it's going to be an illegal activation. So that's one thing where Gamma is going to have a lot of very weird rulings in this game especially, but this is just one in particular that I find fairly important to know. Bonus ruling behind Gamma as well, and this is one of my favorites, is that if your opponent has an effect that they're trying to use and you chain Gamma and they chain There Can Be Only One, it's a very interesting scenario. But again, pause the video, try to figure out if you are actually able to Gamma while there's a There Can Be Only One. Does it resolve? The answer is yes, because it's a simultaneous summon, which is really interesting. It's like a pendulum summon at that point. It's just all at once. So you'll summon the Gamma and the Driver, and then you just have to immediately send one of them to the graveyard. So definitely a very cool one, one that you want to know. But again, Gamma just has a lot of really weird rulings. Now for the last thing here, and this is going to be fairly important because I feel like this comes up way more than it needs to, but it's still something that you will see in most games that you play. Now, the first part of this is use versus activate. If a card says you can only use and you can only activate, it's two very different things. So Talent, for example, says you can only activate. So if you activate Talent, your opponent judgments, you are allowed to activate another talent. If you use the effect of Desiree to negate, and then you get Solemn Striked, and then you summon another Desiree and you try to use the effect again, you can't. You can only attempt to use once per turn. If it was you can only activate, they negate the activation, you can attempt to activate it again. Right? So that's one thing where between use and activate, two very important distinctions. And I like that a lot because of even things like Baron. I remember back when I was playing tier and Baron was around, I like activated a talent and my opponent Baroned it, and I was like, oh, sick, second talent, right? So it's really good. The other thing that's really important though about use is that if your opponent uses a Desiree and they negate your cards, or you like respond or like shut off the Desiree at the time, right? You like cross negate the effect or whatever. You can talent, steal a Desiree, and now it says you can only use, you responds to the player. So you can, as in your opponent already did, but you can still use the card. So if you steal their Desiree, now you can use the Desiree. And that's one thing that I feel like a lot of people just don't know. Now, it's a little different if it's like a Dragoon or a Baron, because it says once while face up on the field or once per turn. And those are way different because that just means that like that card can only be used once per turn at all, like while it's on the board. If you like bring it back or something, sure. But with a you can only use, it applies to the player, so it's a lot similar to like Borreload Savage. And that was one thing where you could steal it and you could use it again because your opponent used it and now you can use it. But again, cards like Dragoon and Baron, it's only once per turn, right? At least while it's on the board. So you can go ahead and like book it, flip it back up, use it, send it to the grave, reborn it, use it. So it's a little different, but you can only use versus you can only activate, two very important distinctions that you just have to know. If you did like the weekly ruling session, definitely let me know. I can't wait to make more of these. It's a lot of fun to know these because they're really important for your technical play and they're even better for your gameplay. So if you haven't already joined my Twitter, Twitch, Discord, or Instagram, definitely go ahead and do so. Also subscribe to the channel. I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you all so much, and I'll catch you in the next one.